I stood frozen as they called my name at the graduation ceremony. Janice Thompson, Master of Business Administration. The auditorium's silence felt deafening. No cheers, no applause, no familiar voices, celebrating 15 years of night classes while raising 3 children. My husband Brian, our twins, Emma and Ethan, and 12-year-old Lily had all chosen my younger brother Scott's barbecue instead. I clutched my diploma, forcing a smile as I descended the stairs. That's when my phone vibrated in my pocket. A text from Brian. "We need to talk. Urgently." My heart pounded as I checked my notifications, 45 missed calls from home. 18 years ago, I discovered I was pregnant with twins just 2 months after high school graduation. My college acceptance letters became distant memories as Brian and I rushed to the altar, settled into a modest starter home, and prepared for parenthood. I was 19, terrified, and saying goodbye to all my carefully plotted career plans. "Your education can wait," my mother had said, patting my swollen belly. "Family comes first now." Brian was 22, already 3 years into his marketing career. He assured me I could go back to school someday, but his career naturally took priority. Someone needed a stable income, and someone needed to raise our children. The division of labor seemed logical at the time. The twins, Emma and Ethan, were born healthy but colicky. By the time they started kindergarten, Lily was on the way, an unplanned but welcome addition to our family. The years blurred together in a haze of school, lunches, soccer practices, doctor appointments, and part-time retail jobs I took during school hours to help with expenses. My younger brother, Scott, had followed a different path. Without the distraction of early parenthood, he'd completed his business degree, then an MBA, and launched a successful real estate development company. Our parents never missed an opportunity to highlight his accomplishments at family gatherings. Scott just closed on another commercial property downtown, my father would announce, beaming with pride while I cleared the dinner dishes. 2 years ago, with the twins in high school, and Lily more independent, I finally enrolled in an MBA program. Classes ran from 6 to 10 in the evenings, 4 nights a week. I'd race from my part-time bookkeeping job to campus, often skipping dinner, studying during lunch breaks and weekends. The family seemed supportive at first. Brian helped with dinner on class nights, and the kids managed their own homework. But as months passed, their enthusiasm waned. Comments about my absence became more frequent. "Mom's never home anymore," Ethan would complain when I missed his basketball games. "Can't you skip class tonight? It's my birthday," Lily had pleaded last winter. Brian's support cooled as well. "Is this degree really worth all this disruption?" he'd asked after a particularly heated argument about household responsibilities. I'd marked my graduation date on our family calendar months in advance. Everyone had promised to attend, even seeming excited as the date approached. Then, 3 days before the ceremony, Scott announced he was hosting a barbecue on the same afternoon as my graduation. "It's last minute," he'd explained on our family group chat. "But the weather's going to be perfect, and Dad's birthday is next week. Thought we could celebrate early." I'd immediately called Brian. "You guys are still coming to my graduation, right?" There was a pause too long to be reassuring. "Well, Scott's got this whole thing planned. Your parents are going, and the kids were looking forward to swimming in his pool. But my graduation has been planned for months. This is my master's degree, Brian. 15 years in the making." "It's just a ceremony, Janice," he said, his voice dismissive. "We can celebrate your accomplishment any time. It's not like we won't be proud of you if we don't sit through 3 hours of name-calling." "That's not the point. This is important to me. I need you there." The argument escalated until Brian snapped. "The kids want to go to Scott's, and I'm not going to disappoint them. We can have a nice dinner next weekend to celebrate your graduation." On the morning of my graduation, I dressed alone in our bedroom, adjusting my cap in the mirror while listening to the excited chatter downstairs as my family prepared for Scott's barbecue. "Don't forget the potato salad in the fridge," I called down as I grabbed my purse. "Good luck today," Mom, Lily shouted back. At least someone acknowledged I was leaving. Brian appeared at the bottom of the stairs. "We'll try to stop by after the barbecue if it's not too late," he offered, not meeting my eyes. "Don't bother," I replied, brushing past him toward the door. After the ceremony, I lingered in the parking lot, scrolling through social media while trying to swallow my disappointment. That's when I saw the post that made my blood run cold. A photo Scott had shared 3 hours earlier, finalizing plans for the epic family barbecue. Thanks to Brian for helping coordinate everyone's schedules. 2 weeks in the making. 2 weeks. They had been planning this for 2 weeks, not as a last-minute gathering. My husband had actively helped arrange a competing event on my graduation day. This wasn't a simple scheduling conflict. It was a deliberate choice. I zoomed in on the photo, Brian and Scott, standing together, beers in hand, next to a whiteboard with the date of my graduation circled and crossed out. The drive home from the graduation ceremony felt endless. Each attempt to call home went straight to voicemail. My mind raced through worst-case scenarios. Had there been an accident? Was someone hurt? But the image of that damning whiteboard in Scott's photo kept intruding. Whatever emergency awaited me at home, it was happening against the backdrop of a deliberate betrayal. I pulled into our driveway at 7:30 that evening, noticing water trickling down the front walkway despite the clear weather. Inside the house was eerily quiet, but the sound of running water led me upstairs. I found our master bathroom flooded water seeping through the ceiling into the living room below. The toilet had overflowed and been left unattended. After shutting off the water valve and grabbing towels, I noticed our bedroom door was slightly ajar. Inside, an envelope had fallen from my dresser drawer, which wasn't fully closed. Curious, I opened it and found what appeared to be college acceptance letters, recent ones, addressed to Emma and Ethan. Not just any colleges, but elite universities offering substantial scholarships. Letters my own children had never mentioned receiving. I sat on our bed, thumbing through the paperwork in disbelief. According to the dates, these had arrived over a month ago. A handwritten note from Emma to Ethan was clipped to one letter. "Don't tell Mom yet. Dad says we should wait until after her graduation thing." My phone rang, suddenly startling me. Brian's face appeared on the screen. "Where have you been?" I demanded. "I've been trying to call for hours." "We've been trying to reach you too. Why weren't you answering your phone?" It was silenced during the ceremony. "What's going on?" "It's Dad," Brian said, his voice breaking. "My father had a stroke at Scott's place. We're at Memorial Hospital. He's in the ICU. My anger temporarily subsided. "Is he? How is he?" "They're not sure yet. But Janice, where were you? We called and called. He was asking for you specifically before it happened." The accusation in his tone was unmistakable. "I was at my graduation, Brian. The one you all skipped for a barbecue that was apparently planned weeks ago." "Are you seriously making this about you right now? My father could be dying." "I'll be there as soon as I can," I said, choosing to set aside the argument. "But you should know the toilet overflowed. There's water damage." "Just get to the hospital," he snapped before hanging up. 20 minutes later, I walked into the hospital waiting room to find my entire family huddled together. The twins looked up with tear-streaked faces, then quickly looked away. Lily ran to hug me, the only genuine welcome I received. Brian approached, his expression hard. "Nice of you to finally join us." "I came as soon as I heard," I said quietly, unwilling to escalate in front of his worried family. My mother-in-law, Barbara, stood up. "He was asking where you were, Janice. Right before it happened." Her implication was clear. Somehow my absence was connected to Henry's stroke. "I'm sorry I wasn't there," I said. "But I had no idea this was happening. I was at my graduation." "Your graduation," Brian repeated, as if the word tasted bitter, while my father was collapsing. Before I could respond, a doctor approached with an update. Henry was stable but would need to remain hospitalized for at least a week. The family could see him briefly 2 at a time. "You should go in with your mother," I told Brian, placing a hand on his arm that he subtly shrugged off. While the family took turns visiting Henry, I sat alone in the waiting room, the day's events swirling in my mind. I texted my congratulations to several classmates who had invited me to a celebration dinner I'd declined, assuming I would be having my own family celebration. When Brian finally returned to the waiting room, his eyes were red, but his posture was rigid. "He's asking for you," he said flatly. "Specifically." Surprised, I followed a nurse to Henry's room. My father-in-law looked pale against the white hospital sheets, his normally robust frame diminished by medical equipment, but his eyes were clear and alert. "Janice," he said, his voice raspy but strong. "Congratulations, kiddo." Tears sprang to my eyes. "You remembered." "Course I did. Was gonna give you something today. In my jacket pocket at Scott's house. Have Brian bring it to you." "Don't worry about that now," I said. "Just focus on getting better." He gripped my hand with surprising strength. "Before the episode, I asked for you. Wanted you to have it today. Special day." "Thank you, Henry." I whispered, genuinely moved. Proud of you, he continued. Always said you'd go back. 15 years, that's determination. A nurse appeared to inform me my time was up. I kissed Henry's forehead before leaving. Back in the waiting room, I approached Brian. Your dad said there's something in his jacket pocket for me, at Scott's house. Brian frowned. Now isn't the time, Janice. He specifically asked me to tell you to get it. I'll check later, he said dismissively. The drive home was tense, the car filled with unspoken accusations. The twins had opted to stay at the hospital with their grandmother while Lily fell asleep in the back seat. You should have had your phone on, Brian finally said, as we pulled into our driveway. It was a graduation ceremony, Brian. We were specifically told to silence our phones. When family is involved, you make exceptions. I didn't know there was an emergency. And maybe if anyone had bothered to attend my graduation, they could have told me what was happening. Brian slammed the car door. This isn't about your graduation, isn't it? Because it seems like everything was orchestrated to ensure no one would be there. We carried the sleeping Lily to her room, then surveyed the water damage together in silence. I'll call the insurance company tomorrow, I finally said. Fine. As we prepared for bed, the weight of the day pressed down on me. My achievement had been thoroughly overshadowed. My moment of pride turned to ash. And now somehow I was the villain in the family narrative. The next morning I drove back to the hospital alone. I found Henry awake, and more alert than the previous night. Did Brian get my gift for you? He asked immediately. Not yet. Things have been a little chaotic. Henry frowned. Tell him it's important. It's a check, Janice. A substantial one. For you to start that business you've been talking about. I stared at him, stunned. Business I haven't. Don't be modest. Brian's told me all about your plans after graduation. How you want to start your own consulting firm but needed the capital. I've been planning this for months. My mind raced. I had indeed mentioned such dreams to Brian in passing, but he had dismissed them as impractical. Yet apparently he'd discussed them with his father, who had been planning to fund them all along. Thank you, Henry. That's incredibly generous. He patted my hand. You've earned it, and between you and me it's in your name only. I know how Brian can be with money sometimes. As I left Henry's room, I felt a strange mix of emotions. Gratitude for his unexpected support, confusion about Brian's involvement, and an unsettling sense that there was much more beneath the surface of my family dynamic than I had realized. The next few days unfolded in a haze of hospital visits and mounting tension at home. Henry was recovering well physically, but his doctors were concerned about potential cognitive effects from the stroke. The family settled into a rotation of hospital visits, with Barbara practically living in her husband's room. Brian's hostility toward me hadn't subsided. If anything, it had calcified into something colder and more deliberate. He spent most evenings at the hospital or at Scott's house, ostensibly helping with cleanup from the interrupted barbecue that seemed to have stretched into a multi-day event. The twins remained distant, their interactions with me reduced to monosyllabic responses and averted gazes. Only Lily maintained her usual warmth, though even she seemed confused by the family's fractured dynamics. Why is everyone mad at you, Mom? She asked one evening as I helped her with homework. They're not mad, sweetie, I lied. Everyone's just worried about Grandpa Henry. No, they're mad. I heard Emma tell Ethan it was your fault Grandpa got sick because you were being selfish. The accusation stung, even coming secondhand from a 12-year-old. That's not true, Lily. Grandpa's stroke wasn't anyone's fault. That's what I said, she declared loyally. I told them I wanted to go to your graduation, but Dad said we all had to go to Uncle Scott's or it would hurt his feelings. I hugged her tightly, grateful for her innocence and honesty. Later that evening, while searching for our insurance policy to file a claim for the water damage, I discovered a stack of bank statements Brian had apparently hidden in his home office. What caught my eye wasn't the statements themselves, but the regular transfers to an account I didn't recognize. Significant amounts once or twice a month going back nearly a year. The recipient's name made my blood run cold, Scott Thompson. I was still processing this discovery when Brian returned home. Something in my expression must have given me away because he stopped short in the doorway to his office. What are you doing in here? I held up the statements. Care to explain why you've been transferring thousands of dollars to my brother? He snatched the papers from my hand. You had no right to go through my things. And you have no right to hide financial decisions of this magnitude from me. What's going on, Brian? Why are you giving Scott our money? He sank into his desk chair, suddenly looking exhausted. It's not what you think. Then explain it to me. After a long silence, he admitted, the business has been struggling. The Westlake account fell through last year, and we lost 3 others after that. I needed capital to keep things afloat. So you've been borrowing from Scott? Why didn't you tell me? Because you were so wrapped up in your classes. Because every time I tried to talk about money, you'd start in about how your degree would change everything. His voice rose with each word. Because Scott was the only one who offered to help when I told him we might lose the house. Lose the house, Brian, things can't be that bad. They're worse, he said flatly. We're underwater on the mortgage. Credit cards are maxed out. Scott's loans are the only thing keeping us from bankruptcy. I struggled to absorb this information. Why didn't you let me help? I have a business degree now. I could have looked at the books, found solutions. He laughed bitterly. Your degree, that's your answer to everything these days. It's not just a piece of paper, Brian. It's knowledge skills I've worked hard to develop. Skills that could help us. Scott doesn't think your online night school degree is worth much in the real world. Since when does my brother dictate what happens in our marriage? And my program is fully accredited, not that either of you bothered to ask. Brian stood up abruptly. I need to get back to the hospital. We're not done talking about this. Yes, we are. For now. After he left, I sat in his office for a long time trying to make sense of our financial situation. Eventually, I booted up his laptop, hoping to find QuickBooks or some other accounting software that might give me a clearer picture. What I found instead was a series of emails between Brian and Scott dating back months. Their correspondence revealed a relationship far more complex than just lender and borrower. Scott hadn't simply been helping Brian. He'd been using financial leverage to exert control over my husband's decisions, our family's time, even our housing situation. The most recent email thread made me physically ill. Scott had been pushing Brian to sell our family home, without telling me, to pay back the accumulated debt. He had a smaller property he was willing to let us rent at what he called a family discount. I was still reeling from this discovery when Lily appeared in the doorway, her expression serious. Mom, can I talk to you? Of course, sweetie. She perched on the edge of the desk. I wanted to go to your graduation. I really did. I know that, Lily. No, but I need to tell you. Uncle Scott said if we all went to his barbecue, instead he'd take us to Disney World this summer. But only if nobody went to your graduation. He made it like a test. I struggled to maintain my composure. He said that explicitly. She nodded. Emma and Ethan were so excited about Disney. They said you wouldn't mind missing one person at your ceremony if it meant we got to go to Disney. But I minded. I hugged her tightly. Thank you for telling me the truth, Lily, and for wanting to be there. Are we still going to Disney? She asked in a small voice. I don't know, honey. There's a lot going on right now. That night I couldn't sleep. The puzzle pieces of the past few months were fitting together in disturbing ways. Scott's increasing presence in our lives, Brian's defensiveness, the family's shifting loyalties, all of it connected to money I hadn't even known we needed. The next morning, against Brian's explicit wishes, I drove to the hospital to see Henry alone. I needed answers from someone who might actually tell me the truth. Henry seemed pleased to see me. Have you started planning your business yet? He asked eagerly. Not yet. There's been a lot happening. Did you get my check? No, Henry. Brian hasn't had a chance to look for it. His expression darkened. That's not right. Call Scott, tell him to find my jacket. Henry, can I ask you something? Did you know that Scott has been lending money to Brian? He sighed heavily, suspected as much. Brian's business has been circling the drain for years, too proud to admit it. Years I thought this was recent. Janus, that marketing firm, hasn't turned a real profit since the recession. I tried to help, but Brian wouldn't take my money. Said he didn't want handouts from family. Henry's laugh turned into a cough. But apparently Scott's money doesn't count as family. Why wouldn't he tell me? Same reason he didn't want you getting that degree. Man's pride is a terrible thing. A nurse entered to check Henry's vitals, effectively ending our conversation. As I prepared to leave, Henry gripped my wrist with surprising strength. Get that check, Janice. It's your money. Don't let Scott or Brian tell you otherwise. That afternoon, I returned home to find Scott's expensive SUV in our driveway. I found him and Brian in the kitchen, spreadsheets and documents spread across the table. They fell silent when I entered. "Don't stop on my account," I said coolly. "I already know you're planning to sell my home out from under me." Scott recovered first, his smile condescending. "Janice, always so dramatic. We're just exploring options. Options you didn't think I needed to be included in, despite my name being on the mortgage." Brian at least had the decency to look uncomfortable. "We were going to discuss it with you once we had a concrete plan." "How considerate." I turned to Scott. "Henry asked about a check he left in his jacket pocket at your house. For me, a graduation gift." Scott's expression flickered briefly before settling back into practiced neutrality. "I haven't seen anything like that. Must be confused from the stroke." He seemed quite lucid to me. "Maybe you should check again." "I'll look when I get home," he said dismissively. "While you're at it, perhaps you could explain why you bribed my children to skip my graduation with promises of Disney World." Brian's head snapped up. "What are you talking about?" "Ask your brother-in-law. Apparently my graduation was some kind of loyalty test with Mickey Mouse as the prize." Scott laughed, but it didn't reach his eyes. The kids misunderstood. "I simply mentioned we might plan a family trip this summer, contingent on everyone attending your barbecue instead of my graduation." "That's absurd," Scott scoffed, but his discomfort was evident. I fixed my gaze on Brian. "Is that true? Did you know about this?" Before he could answer, I noticed my laptop open on the counter behind them. The screen showed my resume and business plan, documents I'd created for a class project last semester. "Why are you looking at my files?" Brian and Scott exchanged glances. I moved closer, noticing the document had been edited. My name had been removed, replaced with Brian's. "What is this?" I demanded, turning the laptop toward me. Brian reached to close it, but not before I saw the email draft open in another tab, a job application to Henderson Consulting with my resume and business plan attached, but Brian's name and contact information. "You're applying for jobs using my work." The betrayal felt physical, a blow to my solar plexus. "It's not what it looks like," Brian started. "It looks like identity theft," I said coldly. "It looks like you're using my education, the one you've been dismissing and undermining, to further your own career." The opportunity came up suddenly. Scott interjected. Brian needed updated credentials. "So you stole mine after making me feel guilty for even pursuing my degree." "You're overreacting," Scott said. "This is just family helping family." "Family?" I laughed incredulously. "Is that what you call manipulating my husband, hiding financial information from me, and trying to steal my home? Where's Henry's check?" "Scott." "There is no check," he insisted. "Dad's confused." "I think you're lying. Just like you lied about that barbecue being last minute when you'd been planning it for weeks. Just like you're lying about our housing options." Scott's facade cracked slightly. "Someone needed to do something. Brian's been running his business into the ground while you've been playing student, oblivious to the real world." "Playing student. I've been working part-time, raising 3 children, maintaining this household, and earning a master's degree. What exactly have you been doing besides leveraging my husband's financial troubles to control?" "Our family." Brian stood up. "That's enough, Janice. Scott has been helping us when we needed it most." "Helping, or creating dependency. Have you even looked for that check from your father?" "I told you there is no check," Scott snapped. "Then you won't mind if I go to your house right now and look for myself." "You're not welcome in my home right now," Scott said, his cordial mask completely gone. I turned to Brian. "Are you going to let him speak to me like that in our house?" The moment of truth stretched between us. Finally, Brian said quietly, "Maybe you should go cool off, Janice. We need to finish looking at these numbers." Something broke inside me then, the last thread of hope that my husband might actually stand with me instead of my brother. Without another word, I grabbed my purse and car keys and walked out. As I backed out of the driveway, my phone dinged with an email notification from Henderson Consulting, expressing interest in my qualifications and inviting me to interview, except the email was addressed to Brian Thompson. I drove aimlessly for nearly an hour, my mind churning with everything I'd discovered. My brother had been manipulating my family with money and promises. My husband had been hiding financial troubles while simultaneously stealing my academic work. My children had been bribed into missing the most important day of my adult life. And somewhere in this web of betrayal was a check from Henry that everyone seemed determined to keep from me. Eventually, I found myself in the parking lot of Memorial Hospital. I hadn't consciously decided to return, but something pulled me toward the one person who had actually acknowledged my achievement. Henry was alone in his room, Barbara having finally gone home to rest. He brightened when he saw me. Twice in one day. Must be my lucky charm. I managed a small smile. I had some questions only you could answer. His expression grew serious. About Scott and Brian. It wasn't a question. I nodded. Sit down, Janice. It's time you knew some things. Over the next hour, Henry painted a picture of family dynamics I had never fully understood. How Scott had always been jealous of the attention Brian received from his parents. How, after Barbara and Henry had helped us financially in our early marriage, Scott had resented their generosity. How Scott's business success had finally given him leverage over his older brother. Scott doesn't just lend money, Henry explained. He buys loyalty, control. Always has since he was a kid, trading lunch items for playground favors. But why target our family specifically? Henry sighed. Because you have what he's never managed to find, a genuine partnership. A family that functions with love, not transactions. And because, frankly, he's always had a thing for you. I nearly choked. For me, we can't stand each other. Exactly. You're the only woman who ever saw through him, who wasn't impressed by his money or charm. It eats at him. That's ridiculous. He's married to Melissa. A woman who looks remarkably like you, if you haven't noticed, and who tolerates his control in ways you never would. I sat back processing this information. What about the check you mentioned Scott claims it doesn't exist? Henry's expression hardened. It exists. $10,000 made out to you specifically. And there's more. From beneath his pillow, he withdrew an envelope and handed it to me. I had Barbara bring this from the safe at home. Was saving it for the right moment. Inside was a legal document. A trust agreement naming me as beneficiary established 5 years earlier. I don't understand, I said, scanning the document. This says I'm entitled to $50,000 for educational and entrepreneurial pursuits. That's right. Set it up when you first mentioned going back to school. Knew you'd finish, knew you'd want to do something with that education. Does Brian know about this? Told him last year. He wasn't happy. Said it would encourage you to abandon your family responsibilities. His words, not mine. I felt a fresh wave of betrayal. And Scott? Found out somehow. Been trying to get me to change the terms. Make it a family business investment instead of just yours. Is that why he was so determined to keep me from the barbecue, to keep me from talking to you? Henry nodded. Likely so. Knew I was planning to give you that check as a graduation present. Probably thought he'd have more time to work on me if you weren't there. I sat in stunned silence, the trust document heavy in my hands. There's one more thing, Henry said, his voice growing tired. The trust includes an investment opportunity. Commercial property downtown purchased through my holding company. Building's in my name, but the business lease is available. Prime spot for that consulting firm you want to start. Tears filled my eyes. Why would you do all this for me? Because you earned it. Watched you put everyone else first for 15 years. About time someone put you first. As I prepared to leave, promising to return the next day, Henry gripped my hand once more. Don't let them bully you, Janice. Not Scott, not even Brian. You've worked too hard to have your future decided by men too insecure to celebrate your success. Armed with the trust document and a new understanding of the dynamics at play, I drove home with a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in days. The house was quiet when I arrived. No sign of Brian or Scott. A note on the counter informed me that Brian had taken Lily to stay with his mother for the night. I went straight to our bedroom, intending to pack an overnight bag. I needed space to think, to plan my next move. As I pulled clothes from the dresser, I noticed Brian's phone charging on the nightstand. He had a second phone for work that he usually kept with him. This one I rarely saw. I hesitated only briefly before picking it up. The passcode was Lily's birthday. Brian had always been predictable that way. What I found confirmed my worst fears and added new dimensions to the betrayal. Messages between Brian and Melissa Scott's wife. Not just recent messages, but an ongoing conversation spanning months. Not explicitly romantic, but intimate, in ways that felt equally devastating. Shared secrets, mutual complaints about their spouses, late-night conversations that stretched into the early morning hours. And most damning of all, discussions about after. After the house was sold, after the family relocated closer to them, after I was brought under control. I was still processing this discovery when the front door opened. Brian called my name, his voice echoing through the empty house. I met him in the hallway, his phone in my hand. "Forget something?" I asked, holding it up. His face drained of color. "You went through my phone. Just like you went through my laptop. Seems only fair." "That's different." "Is it because from where I'm standing, stealing my academic work seems a lot worse than confirming my suspicions about you and my sister-in-law?" "There's nothing going on between me and Melissa. Not physically, maybe, but emotionally. You've created an intimacy with her that you haven't had with me in years." "That's ridiculous." "Is it? When was the last time you texted me at 2 in the morning just to say you couldn't sleep? When was the last time you confided your fears to me instead of her?" He had no answer. "Why, Brian? Why wasn't I the person you turned to when the business was struggling? Why wasn't I good enough to help you find solutions?" "Because you were already stretched so thin," he exploded. "Working, studying, taking care of the kids. You had nothing left for me for my problems. So instead of supporting each other as partners, you turned to Scott for money and Melissa for emotional support, and then you all conspired to keep me in the dark while planning major decisions about my life." "It wasn't like that." "It was exactly like that. And now I have to wonder, was missing my graduation really about a barbecue in Disney World, or was it about making sure I didn't speak with Henry before you and Scott could convince him to change his trust?" Brian's expression confirmed my suspicion. "He told you. Everything. The trust, the property, the check you all pretended didn't exist. We were going to use that money for the family Janice, to get us back on our feet. No, you were going to use my money to pay back your debt to Scott, keeping us trapped in his web of financial control. That's not fair. Neither is stealing my work to apply for a job you're not qualified for. Neither is plotting with my brother to sell our home without my knowledge or consent. Neither is encouraging our children to betray me for a trip to Disney World." Brian sank onto the hallway bench head in his hands. "I've made some bad decisions." "That's putting it mildly. But you have to understand, Scott made it all sound so reasonable. Like he was helping us, helping me take care of my family when I couldn't do it alone. And that's the problem, Brian. You stopped seeing us as partners. You made unilateral decisions about our family's future, and when I tried to contribute in my own way, through education, you resented it. I was afraid," he admitted quietly. "Afraid you'd outgrow me. Afraid you wouldn't need me anymore. And then when the business started failing, that fear became reality. What could I offer you that you couldn't provide for yourself? Partnership, honesty, support, the same things I've been offering you for 18 years. We sat in silence, the weight of truth settling between us. "What happens now?" he finally asked. "I don't know," I answered honestly. "But I'm going to stay with my friend Diane tonight. I need space to think. And the kids, tell them I'll call tomorrow. They deserve an explanation from both of us about what's been happening." As I finished packing my overnight bag, Brian hovered in the doorway. "Scott's not what you think," he said suddenly. "He does care about us. Scott cares about controlling us. There's a difference. He offered solutions when I had none. Solutions that benefited him and kept you dependent." I zipped the bag closed. "Did you know Henry offered to help you years ago, without strings attached?" Brian looked away. It felt too much like charity. "But Scott's help didn't. Scott made it feel like partnership. While systematically isolating you from your actual partner, I picked up the bag. That's what abusers do, Brian. They isolate their victims from support systems." "That's a bit extreme. Is it? Ask yourself this. When was the last time you made a major decision without consulting Scott first?" His silence was answer enough. As I headed for the door, my phone buzzed with an email notification. The same one I'd seen earlier from Henderson Consulting, but forwarded from Brian's email to mine with a single line added, "This belongs to you." It was a small gesture, but in that moment it felt like the first honest thing he'd done in months. I spent 3 days at Diane's apartment using the time to process everything I'd learned and to develop a plan. Diane had been my closest friend in the MBA program, a divorced attorney who specialized in family law. Her legal perspective proved invaluable as I sorted through my options. The trust from Henry gives you options, she explained over coffee on the second morning. Financial independence means you don't have to make decisions from a place of fear. I'm not afraid of being on my own, I said. I'm afraid of breaking up my family. From what you've told me, Scott's already been doing that systematically. The question is whether Brian is willing to break free from his influence. I had been in regular contact with the children, though the twins remained distant during our brief calls. Lily, however, called several times a day, clearly distressed by my absence. "When are you coming home, Mom?" she asked during our most recent conversation. "Soon, sweetheart. I just needed a few days to think about some grown-up problems. Is it because of what Uncle Scott did? Because Emma and Ethan are really mad at him now?" This caught my attention. Why are they mad at him? Because he told them the Disney trip isn't happening anymore. He said it was because you're being difficult about the house. My blood boiled at Scott's manipulation of my children. That's not true, Lily. The truth is more complicated, and I'll explain everything when I come home. On my third day away, I received a call from Henderson Consulting. They had received a follow-up email clarifying that I, not Brian, was the actual candidate, and they wanted to schedule an interview. The salary they mentioned was nearly twice what I currently earned at my part-time bookkeeping job. That afternoon, I met with Henry at the hospital. His condition had improved enough that he was being moved to a rehabilitation facility the next day. "I've been thinking about your offer," I told him. "The trust, the commercial space." He nodded encouragingly. "I'm grateful, more than I can express. But I need to know this isn't about taking sides in whatever's been happening between you and Scott." Henry chuckled. "Smart girl. Always were." He shifted in his bed. "Truth is, Scott's been trying to control the family money for years. This trust is my way of ensuring some of it goes where it should, to someone who'll use it wisely." "And Brian, where does he fit into all this?" "Brian's a good man who lost his way. Let pride cloud his judgment." Henry's expression softened. "He loves you, Janice. Always has. But he's never quite believed he deserved you." "That doesn't excuse his behavior." "No, it doesn't. But understanding why people do what they do can help you decide what to do next." I left the hospital with a clear sense of direction. It was time to confront the situation head-on and reclaim control of my life and family. When I returned home that evening, I found Brian and the children waiting in the living room, an impromptu family meeting apparently in progress. Mom Lily ran to hug me, followed more hesitantly by the twins. "We didn't know if you were coming back," Emma said quietly. "Of course I was coming back," I assured them. "I just needed some time to think." "About divorcing," Dad Ethan asked bluntly. I glanced at Brian, whose expression was unreadable. "About what's best for our family moving forward." We spent the next hour in honest conversation. I explained about the financial troubles Brian had hidden, about Scott's increasing control over our family decisions, and about the trust Henry had established. I was careful not to vilify their father, focusing instead on the importance of honesty and partnership in marriage. "So we're not losing the house?" Emma asked. "Not if I have anything to say about it," I assured her. "And not if your father and I work together to find solutions." "What about Uncle Scott?" Ethan's expression had hardened at the mention of his uncle. "He promised us the Disney trip. If we skipped your graduation, then took it back when you wouldn't agree to sell the house." "Your uncle has his own way of looking at family obligations," I said carefully. "But from now on, major family decisions will be made by your father and me together." After the children went to bed, Brian and I sat at the kitchen table, the distance between us both physical and emotional. "I contacted Henderson Consulting," he said finally. "Told them there had been a mistake, that the resume and credentials were yours." "I know. They called me today." "Are you going to take the job if they offer it?" "I'm considering it. The salary would go a long way toward resolving our financial issues." He nodded. "I'm sorry, Janice. For all of it. For hiding the problems with the business, for turning to Scott instead of you, for missing your graduation. Especially that." "Why did you do it, Brian?" "Really?" He was quiet for a long moment. "Because I was ashamed. Because I failed at the one thing I was supposed to be good at, providing for my family. And watching you succeed, watching you thrive, it just highlighted my failure. That's not how partnership works. Your success is my success, My success is yours. I know that. Intellectually, I know that. But emotionally, he trailed off. Scott made it easy to blame you, to see your education as the problem rather than my business failures. And Melissa, was she Scott's idea too? Brian flinched. No, that was my weakness. She was. Sympathetic. Understanding. She made me feel competent when everything else in my life made me feel like a failure. Did you sleep with her? No, it wasn't like that. Then what was it like? Emotional infidelity, he admitted, which in some ways feels worse, more deliberate. I couldn't argue with that assessment. Scott's coming over tomorrow, Brian said abruptly. He wants to discuss next steps for the house situation. There is no house situation. We're not selling. He's not going to accept that easily. He's got a lot invested in us taking his solution. Then it's time we stood together against his manipulation. Brian looked up, hope flickering in his eyes. Together, does that mean? It means I'm willing to work on our marriage, Brian, but with conditions. Complete financial transparency, couples counseling. And you need to cut ties with Scott financially, even if it means declaring bankruptcy. And Melissa? That ends immediately. Completely. He nodded without hesitation. What about the trust from Dad, the commercial property? That's mine, I said firmly. To use for my business as Henry intended. It's non-negotiable. I understand. He reached tentatively across the table, his hand stopping short of mine. I don't deserve a second chance, Janice. But I'm asking for one anyway. I didn't take his hand, not yet. You'll have to earn back my trust, Brian. It won't happen overnight. I know, but I want to try. That night, I slept in our bed for the first time in days, Brian on the couch, by his own suggestion. As I drifted off, I felt stronger and more certain than I had in years. Whatever happened with Scott tomorrow, I would face it on my terms. Morning brought a tense anticipation to the household. The twins had decided to join Lily at a friend's house for the day, wanting no part of the confrontation with Scott. I spent the hours before his arrival gathering financial documents, including the trust paperwork from Henry, and preparing my arguments. Scott arrived precisely at noon, his expensive suit and confident swagger at odds with the simmering hostility that greeted him. Family meeting time, he announced, setting his briefcase on the coffee table. I've brought some paperwork for the house transfer. There won't be any house transfer, I said calmly. Scott's smile tightened. Brian and I have already discussed this, Janice. It's the only viable option given your financial situation. Our financial situation is no longer your concern. I've invested considerable resources in keeping your family afloat. That makes it very much my concern. Brian cleared his throat. We appreciate what you've done, Scott, but we've decided to explore other options. Scott's gaze snapped to my husband. We had an agreement. No, Brian replied, his voice growing stronger. You had a plan. I'm choosing a different one. With what resources you're broke, Brian. Your business is failing. Your credit is shot. Without me, you lose everything. Not everything, I interjected. We still have each other. We still have options you don't control. Scott turned to me, his expression calculating. Let me guess. Daddy Henry's little trust fund that barely covers what Brian owes me. So you did know about it, I said, despite claiming otherwise. Of course I knew. Just like I know about the commercial property, the business investment, all of it. Henry may think he's being clever, but all family assets eventually come under my management. That's where you're wrong, I said, sliding the trust document across the table. This is irrevocable with me as sole beneficiary. You have no claim to it. Scott barely glanced at the paperwork. Legal documents can be challenged, especially when the grantor's mental capacity might be questioned after a stroke. Are you threatening to declare your own father mentally incompetent to invalidate his gift to me? I'm suggesting that family resources should benefit the entire family, not just one member with delusions of entrepreneurship. The disdain in his voice sparked something in me. Not anger, but clarity. This isn't about money, I realized aloud. This is about control. You can't stand that I've achieved something independently, that I might build something you don't have authority over. Scott laughed dismissively. Don't flatter yourself. Your little night school degree hardly qualifies as an achievement. And yet Henderson Consulting seems to think it's worth a 6-figure salary, I countered. For the first time, Scott appeared genuinely surprised. They offered you a job. An interview, I clarified. after Brian clarified who actually earned the MBA. You'll never last in that environment, Scott scoffed. Corporate consulting requires connections, experience, skills you simply don't have. Perhaps. But I'd rather try and fail on my own terms than succeed on yours. Scott turned back to Brian, ignoring me completely. Are you really going to let her jeopardize your family's security based on some corporate interview that probably won't pan out? Think about the twins' college tuition, about Lily's future. The twins have scholarship offers, Brian replied. Offers they received on their own merits, not because of your influence or money. And I think we're all clear on how much you actually care about our children's well-being, I added. Using Disney World to bribe them into missing my graduation was particularly inspired. A misunderstanding, Scott insisted, but his discomfort was evident. Was it also a misunderstanding when you promised to fund their college education if they stayed loyal to you instead of me, I asked. Because Emma and Ethan mentioned you've already retracted that offer. I simply explained that family support requires family loyalty. Exactly, I said. But your definition of loyalty means obedience to you. Control by you. Scott stood abruptly. This conversation is pointless. Brian, you have until the end of the week to sign the transfer paperwork, or I'll be forced to call in your loans in full. That won't be necessary, came a new voice from the doorway. We all turned to find Lily standing there, her phone held up recording. Lily, I exclaimed. I thought you were at Madison's house. I came back to get my charger, she said. But then I heard Uncle Scott threatening you guys, so I started recording. She looked directly at Scott. I've been recording for 10 minutes. I already sent it to Emma and Ethan. Scott's face darkened. Give me that phone, Lily. Stay away from my daughter, Brian warned, stepping between them. You're all making a huge mistake, Scott said, gathering his briefcase. Without me, this family falls apart. Actually, I replied calmly, I think without you we might finally come back together. After Scott stormed out, the three of us stood in stunned silence until Lily broke it by asking, Did I do good, Mom? I hugged her tightly. You did exactly right, sweetheart. Later that evening, as Brian and I discussed next steps, my phone rang with an unknown number. It was Henderson Consulting offering me the position with an immediate start date. The salary was enough to address our most pressing financial concerns, with a clear path to advancement. As I accepted the offer, I felt the weight of the past week lifting. For the first time in years, I was making a decision based on my own abilities and potential, not as a reaction to someone else's expectations or manipulations. When I ended the call, Brian was waiting with a tentative smile. Congratulations. You deserve this. Thank you. I paused, then added, I meant what I said earlier. If we're going to move forward, things have to change. Real partnership. Complete honesty. I know, and I'm ready to try. He hesitated. Scott will make good on his threat, you know. He'll demand immediate repayment. Then we'll deal with that together, even if it means bankruptcy. I never thought I'd say this, but bankruptcy sounds almost liberating compared to being under Scott's control. As we sat planning our next steps, my phone buzzed with a text from an unfamiliar number. It was from Melissa, Scott's wife. We need to talk, it's important, and Scott can't know. The meeting with Melissa was set for the following afternoon at a coffee shop halfway between our homes. I deliberated whether to tell Brian, ultimately deciding that our new commitment to honesty required full disclosure. I think you should go, he said after I showed him the text. But be careful. Scott and Melissa have always been a united front. That's what makes this request so unusual, I agreed. I'm curious what she wants. Maybe their united front is fracturing. I arrived at the coffee shop 15 minutes early, choosing a table with a clear view of both entrances. Melissa appeared precisely on time. Her normally perfect appearance, slightly disheveled dark circles, visible beneath her designer sunglasses. Thank you for coming, she said, sliding into the seat across from me. I wasn't sure you would. Honestly, I wasn't sure I would either. She removed her sunglasses, revealing reddened eyes. I'm sorry about your graduation. For what it's worth, I told Scott it was cruel. But you still attended his barbecue. I don't have the luxury of defiance. She glanced nervously toward the door. Scott monitors my whereabouts through my phone. I left it at my yoga studio, so he thinks I'm in class. This wasn't the confident, polished Melissa I was accustomed to. Why the secrecy? What's going on? She withdrew a thumb drive from her purse. Everything you need is on here. Financial records, emails, recordings of conversations. Scott's been systematically manipulating your family for years, but it goes beyond what you know. I stared at the drive. Why are you giving me this? Because I'm leaving him, she said simply, and I need allies. I'm hardly an ally, Melissa. Especially given your relationship with my husband. She flinched. That's part of what I need to explain. Those messages between Brian and me, they weren't what they seemed. They seemed pretty clear to me. Scott monitored our conversations. He has access to all my accounts, my phone, everything. She hesitated. He suggested I cultivate a friendship with Brian, to keep tabs on him. You expect me to believe Scott encouraged an emotional affair between his wife and his brother. Not an affair, a source of information. A way to manipulate Brian through me. She leaned forward. Think about it, Janice. When did Brian and I start texting regularly? I considered the timeline. About 6 months ago, right after Scott loaned him the first significant amount. It wasn't coincidence. The pieces began fitting together in a disturbing new pattern, so Scott was using you to, what? Spy on Brian. Influence him. Feed him ideas that seemed to come from me, but actually originated with Scott. Create distance between you two. She looked down at her coffee. I'm not proud of my role in it. Why would Scott go to such lengths? Control, primarily, but also. She hesitated again. Scott has always been fixated on you in his way. The one woman who wasn't impressed by him, who chose his less successful brother. It's been a thorn in his side for years. Henry had suggested the same thing, but hearing it from Melissa made it more disturbing somehow. That's twisted. Scott is twisted. I should know. I've been married to him for 12 years. She tapped the thumb drive. It's all here, including evidence that he's been siphoning money from your father-in-law's accounts for years. Stealing from Henry. She nodded. Small amounts carefully disguised as management fees or investment expenses. It adds up to substantial sums over time. Does Henry know? I don't think so. Scott handles all his financial affairs. I picked up the thumb drive. Why now, Melissa? Why turn on him after all these years of complicity? Her expression hardened. Because I found out what he's been doing with that money. He has another family, Janice, a woman and a child in Seattle. He's been living a double life for years. I sat back, stunned. Are you certain? It's on the drive. Photos money transfers everything. I hired a private investigator 3 months ago when I first suspected. I'm sorry, I said, and meant it despite our complicated history. I don't want your sympathy. I want your help. She leaned forward again. I need allies against him when this becomes public. Scott won't let me go easily. He'll try to destroy me just like he's been trying to control your family. What exactly do you want from me? Use the information. Stand up to him. When I file for divorce, I need other voices confirming his manipulation, his deception. Otherwise, it's just my word against his, and he's very convincing. I considered her request. This evidence about Henry's accounts, it's conclusive. Bank records, doctored statements, everything. Scott never thought I'd look closely at his financial dealings. He underestimated me. Her smile was bitter. Men often do. After Melissa left, I sat for a long time, turning the thumb drive over in my hands. If what she said was true, it changed everything. Not just for my family, but for Henry, for Scott's business associates, for everyone who had trusted him. I spent that evening reviewing the files with Brian. The evidence was damning: years of financial manipulation, secret accounts, fabricated investment reports, and most disturbing of all, documentation of Scott's second life in Seattle. I can't believe it, Brian said repeatedly as we scrolled through bank statements showing systematic theft from Henry's accounts. All these years I thought he was the successful one, the financially responsible one. He created that illusion very carefully, I noted, and used it to make you doubt yourself, to make you dependent on him. What do we do with this information? First, we secure our position. I outlined my plan, accepting the job at Henderson, using part of Henry's trust to pay off our most pressing debts, consulting with a bankruptcy attorney about the remaining obligations to Scott, and most importantly, documenting everything in preparation for potential legal action. You think it will come to that? Brian asked. I think Scott won't surrender control without a fight, and I think we need to be prepared. The next day I visited Henry at the rehabilitation facility, bringing copies of the most relevant documents from Melissa's drive. I suspected something wasn't right with the accounts, he said after reviewing the evidence. Numbers never quite added up, but Scott always had explanations. He's been stealing from you for years, Henry. Hundreds of thousands of dollars. Not just stealing, Henry observed. Building leverage. Creating dependency. Classic Scott. What do you want to do about it? Henry's expression was resolute. Everything. I want to do everything possible to stop him and reclaim what's mine. Over the next week, we put our plan into action. I started my position at Henderson Consulting, while Brian began the process of winding down his struggling business. We consulted with a bankruptcy attorney who confirmed that a Chapter 13 filing would allow us to restructure Scott's loans without losing our home. The twins, now fully aware of Scott's manipulation, stopped all contact with their uncle. Emma even refused a direct offer from Scott to fund her college education, telling him plainly, "I'd rather take student loans than be controlled by you." Henry, with my assistance, began the process of auditing his accounts and documenting the evidence of Scott's financial misconduct. He also revised his will and financial directives, removing Scott from any position of authority over his affairs. The confrontation we all anticipated came sooner than expected. Scott arrived unannounced at our home on a Sunday afternoon, just as the family was sitting down to dinner. "We need to talk," he announced from the doorway, his expression thunderous. "All of us." Brian and I exchanged glances. "The children are having dinner," I said calmly. "This isn't a good time." "This can't wait. You've been avoiding my calls, ignoring my messages. The loan repayment deadline has passed." "We've been in touch with our attorney," Brian replied, standing to face his brother. "You'll be receiving formal correspondence about the loans." Attorney Scott laughed incredulously. "You can't afford an attorney." "Actually, we can," I interjected. "My new position at Henderson comes with an excellent legal assistance benefit." Scott's attention shifted to me, his expression darkening. "So you got the job. Congratulations. But it doesn't change the fact that Brian owes me over $200,000 due immediately." "We're filing for Chapter 13 bankruptcy protection," Brian informed him. "The debt will be restructured under court supervision." "You wouldn't dare." "We already have. The paperwork was filed yesterday." Scott's composure slipped momentarily before he regained control. "This is how you repay my generosity, by hiding behind bankruptcy laws." "Your generosity came with too many strings," I said. "We're cutting those strings." "You've made a serious miscalculation," Scott warned. "Both of you. I can make things very difficult for your new employer, Janice, for your professional reputation." "Are you threatening me?" "I'm stating facts. My company has connections throughout the business community. One word from me about your family's financial irresponsibility would be slander," I finished for him, "and would open you to legal action." Scott smiled thinly. "It's not slander if it's true. And I have documentation of every loan, every missed payment." "Just as we have documentation of your financial misconduct," Brian countered. "Your theft from Dad's accounts. Your misrepresentation of investment returns." For the first time, Scott appeared genuinely startled. "What are you talking about?" "We know everything," I said quietly. "About the money you've stolen from Henry. About your second family in Seattle. Everything." Scott's face drained of color. "Melissa," he breathed. "She's been talking to you. She's been showing us evidence," I corrected. "Very compelling evidence that's now in the hands of our attorney, Henry's attorney, and in a secure location that will automatically send it to the authorities if anything happens to any of us." "You're bluffing." "Test us and find out." The standoff was interrupted by the sound of a car in the driveway. Through the window, I saw my parents emerging from a taxi. "Were you expecting them?" Brian asked, equally surprised. I shook my head as I went to greet them. "Mom, Dad, what are you doing here?" My mother hugged me tightly. "We just got back from our cruise. We need to talk to you about something important." "We have company," I warned, gesturing toward the house, where Scott was visible through the window. "Scott," my father said, his expression hardening. "Good. He should hear this too." Inside, the tension was palpable as my parents joined our standoff with Scott. The children had retreated upstairs at my signal, leaving the adults to their confrontation. "I'm sorry we missed your graduation, sweetheart," my mother began, "but we were told it was next week." "Next week? By whom?" My father pulled out his phone, showing me text messages, ostensibly from me, confirming an incorrect graduation date. "These aren't from me," I said, bewildered. "We know that now," my father replied, glancing at Scott. "When we got back and checked our emails, we found your original invitation with the correct date. Someone deliberately misinformed us." All eyes turned to Scott, who had the decency to look uncomfortable. "It was a misunderstanding," he attempted. "Like the misunderstanding about Henry's check," I challenged. "Or the misunderstanding about your financial management of his accounts." My parents looked confused. "What check? What's going on?" "Perhaps we should all sit down," I suggested. "There's a lot to explain." Over the next hour, the full extent of Scott's manipulations was laid bare. The financial control, the deliberate isolation of family members, the creation of conflicts and misunderstandings to maintain his position of authority. "I was trying to help Scott," insisted repeatedly, "to keep the family financially secure." "By stealing from your own father," my father demanded. "By lying to us about Janice's graduation. By maintaining a second family in Seattle," Brian added, delivering the coup de grace. My mother gasped. "What?" Scott stood abruptly. "This is absurd. You have no proof of these allegations." "Actually, we do," I said, calmly retrieving my laptop. "Melissa has been quite thorough in her documentation." As I turned the screen to show a family photo of Scott with a woman and young child in front of the Space Needle, the front door opened again. Melissa entered, her timing impeccable. "I thought you might try to deny it," she said, addressing Scott directly. "So I brought additional evidence." The confrontation that followed was both explosive and cathartic. Years of manipulation, lies, and control were exposed to the harsh light of truth. Scott alternated between denial, rationalization, and when those failed, threats. "None of you would have what you have without me," he declared. "I've been the financial backbone of this family for years." "You've been its parasite," Henry corrected from the doorway where he stood supported by his nurse. None of us had noticed his arrival amidst the confrontation. Dad, Scott began, his tone immediately shifting to one of concern. "You shouldn't be here. You're still recovering." "I'm exactly where I need to be," Henry replied, "protecting my family from your manipulations once and for all." The final revelation came from my mother, who had remained uncharacteristically quiet during much of the exchange. "There's something else you should all know," she said, her voice steady despite her evident distress. "The reason we were on that cruise in the first place. Scott told us it was a gift from him. A prepaid excursion to celebrate your father's retirement." "It was," Scott insisted. "Except the cruise line had no record of payment when we tried to upgrade our cabin," my father continued. "When we called Scott, he claimed it was an administrative error and gave us his credit card to resolve it. The card was declined," my mother finished. "We ended up paying for the entire cruise ourselves, nearly $10,000. Scott's facade of control finally crumbled. "I was going to reimburse you. There were some temporary cash flow issues with the business." "The business that exists primarily on paper," Melissa interjected. "The one where most of the properties are heavily mortgaged and the investor returns fabricated." By the end of the evening, a new family order had been established. Scott left alone, his influence shattered, his deceptions exposed. Henry initiated formal proceedings to audit his accounts and recover stolen funds. My parents committed to seeking legal advice about their financial losses, and Melissa began the process of filing for divorce, armed with evidence of Scott's infidelity and financial misconduct. As the dust settled, our immediate family gathered in the living room, emotionally exhausted, but somehow lighter. "What happens now?" Emma asked, speaking for all the children. "We rebuild," I answered simply. "On a foundation of truth this time." Brian reached for my hand, and for the first time in weeks, I didn't pull away. "Together," he affirmed. "If you'll still have me." It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was a beginning. 6 months after that fateful confrontation, I stood at the front of a small gathering in my newly opened consulting office. The commercial space Henry had secured through his trust had been transformed into a modern workspace with large windows overlooking the downtown district. The sign on the door read "Thompson Strategic Consulting," my maiden name, reclaimed for professional purposes with Brian's full support. My first clients included several of Henderson's small business referrals, and ironically 2 former clients of Scott's who had jumped ship when his financial misdeeds became known in business circles. The crowd at this unofficial opening celebration included everyone who had supported me through the tumultuous past year, Henry now fully recovered and serving as my informal business advisor. My parents, whose relationship with me had strengthened after Scott's manipulations were exposed. Diane, who had provided both legal counsel and emotional support, and most importantly my family, Brian and the children. The journey to this moment had not been easy. The bankruptcy filing had proceeded, allowing us to keep our home while restructuring Scott's loans. Brian had closed his failing business, and in a move that surprised everyone had enrolled in a teaching certification program. His experience in marketing had translated well to a position teaching business courses at the local community college, a role that brought him genuine satisfaction without the pressure of entrepreneurial success. The twins had started college locally, their scholarships covering most expenses while they lived at home to save money. Both had distanced themselves completely from Scott, refusing his belated attempts to re-establish contact after his divorce from Melissa became final. Lily, now 13, had blossomed in the more honest family dynamic. Her role in recording Scott's threats had given her a sense of agency that translated into greater confidence in all areas of her life. As for Scott, the family grapevine reported that he had relocated to the West Coast, presumably to be closer to his second family after Melissa's divorce filing had made his double life public. His business interests in our area had been liquidated to satisfy creditors and legal judgments, including a substantial settlement to Henry for the misappropriated funds. "I'd like to say a few words," Brian announced, drawing me from my reflections. The small crowd quieted as he moved to stand beside me. 6 months ago, our family was in crisis. Finances in shambles, trust-broken, future uncertain. He looked directly at me, and a lot of that was my fault. I let pride and insecurity lead me away from the most important partnership in my life. Murmurs of support rippled through the gathering. "I missed Janice's graduation," he continued, "a moment 15 years in the making. An achievement that required more dedication, more persistence, more sheer grit than anything I've ever accomplished." I felt tears threatening as he spoke. I can't go back and change that day. I can't undo that hurt or recapture that moment of triumph that should have been shared with family. But I can stand here today, at the beginning of this new chapter, and publicly acknowledge what I failed to celebrate then. He raised his glass. "To Janice Thompson, Master of Business Administration, founder of Thompson Strategic Consulting, and the strongest, most determined woman I have ever known. You didn't just earn a degree. You showed our children what it means to pursue a dream regardless of obstacles. You showed me what true resilience looks like. And now you're showing the business world what they've been missing." The room erupted in applause as Brian handed me a small, wrapped package. Inside was a framed photo of me in my graduation cap and gown, a professional portrait I'd had taken alone after the ceremony. "Lily found the photographer's business card in your things," he explained quietly. "I tracked down the photos you had taken that day. But it wasn't just the portrait. Behind it, visible through the glass, was my diploma and a handwritten note from Brian. "Tuman, your achievement changed our family forever, for the better. I am prouder of you than words can express." Unable to speak, I simply hugged him, feeling the genuine connection that had been gradually rebuilding between us through months of counseling, honest conversations, and shared efforts to create a healthier family dynamic. After the celebration wound down and the last guest departed, I stood alone in my new office, taking in the reality of what I had created. The journey from that silent graduation ceremony to this moment had been filled with pain, revelation, and ultimately transformation. The door opened softly, and I turned to find Henry watching me with evident pride. "So," he said, settling into one of the visitor chairs, "was it worth it? All the years of night classes, all the sacrifice, all the drama at the end?" I considered his question carefully. "Yes," I finally said. "But not just because of this." I gestured around the office. "It was worth it because it forced the truth into the open. It revealed who people really were, including parts of myself I hadn't fully recognized." Henry nodded thoughtfully. "Sometimes the greatest gift of education isn't the knowledge itself, but how it changes your perception of what's possible. And what's acceptable," I added. I would never have confronted Scott's control without first proving to myself that I could succeed on my own terms. "You know what I think the real lesson is here?" Henry asked, his eyes twinkling with his old humor. "What's that?" "Never miss someone's graduation ceremony. You never know what might happen if you do." I laughed, grateful for his ability to find levity, even in our family's darkest chapter. As he prepared to leave, Henry paused at the door. You saved this family, Janice. Not just financially, but spiritually. You refused to accept less than you deserved, and in doing so, you showed everyone else how to demand more of themselves. After he left, I called Brian to let him know I'd be home soon. As I gathered my things, my gaze fell on a framed quote I'd placed on my desk. Sometimes the longest distance isn't between two places, but between where you are and where you're meant to be. My journey had indeed been long. 15 years from abandoned college plans to master's degree, 6 months from betrayal to new beginning. But standing in my own consulting firm with my family intact if changed, I knew I had finally arrived where I was meant to be all along. And perhaps that was the deepest lesson of all, that our destinies don't always unfold in straight lines or according to schedule. Sometimes they require detours through heartbreak, through betrayal, through standing alone at a graduation ceremony while family celebrates elsewhere. But if we remain true to ourselves, if we refuse to surrender our dreams to others' expectations or manipulations, we eventually find our way to where we belong. As I locked the office door behind me, I felt a profound sense of peace. The past couldn't be changed. Brian would never witness my walk across that graduation stage. My parents would never see me accept my diploma. My children would never cheer as my name was called. But the future remained unwritten, filled with new milestones we could celebrate together. Have you ever had to stand alone in a moment of achievement only to discover later that it became the catalyst for positive change? I invite you to share your story in the comments below. Sometimes the most painful moments in our lives become the turning points that lead us to our true paths. If this story resonated with you, please like this video, subscribe to hear more stories of transformation, and share it with someone who might need encouragement to pursue their dreams despite obstacles. Thank you for joining me on this journey. And remember, your greatest achievement may be the one that feels the most lonely in the moment, but ultimately changes everything for the better.